So we already have a simple episode about implementing Stripe checkout with Webforms, and I've received a few questions about how to implement this as just like a simple payment flow that's directly hosted on your own custom ASP.NET Webforms page. So I want to just quickly run through how I might implement that. I'm not going to interact with the database at all. I don't know, everyone's database layer is going to vary, whether you're using Entity Framework or directly interacting with the database in some other way. So I'm not going to touch the database, but we'll talk about it. And I wanted to just like go through the patterns that are in ASP.NET Web Forms that are different from what you're going to see in ASP.NET MVC. So namely, the work that we generally show for Stripe integrations with these fetch calls from the client that are making AJAX calls back to the backend to some page that is going to return, or to some server endpoint that's going to return JSON. It works a little differently in the ASP.NET world. So I wanted to just kind of walk through that and show that. So to accept a payment, we're going to need to do three things. We're going to create a payment intent on the server, and that is an object that represents the amount and the currency to charge the customer. And the way we do this is we're actually going to make an API call from the code behind on page load that's going to be sent to Stripe, and then Stripe is going to return an instance of a payment intent object. Then we're going to collect payment details on the client. So on the front end, we'll use Stripe.js and elements to put a credit card form on the page where the user can enter their credit card details. And so we'll collect those and tokenize that. And so the tokenization step is going to send the credit card details directly from the front end to Stripe, and then Stripe will respond with a payment method, and that payment method will be used to confirm the payment intent. And depending on the customer's bank, if they're located in the European Economic Area, then the bank might require 3D Secure or some secure customer authentication, which is like a next step that's required to authenticate payment and just give permission to collect payment. And so I wanted to go through that, and then I wanted to also briefly cover how to implement a webhook handler with one of these standard ASHX, I believe they're called, or that's the extension. So let's jump into it. So I'm going to start just from scratch here. We've got Visual Studio 2019 for Mac, and I'm going to say I want to create a new ASP.NET Webform project. Okay, we'll say next. Yeah, we're not going to write a unit test today, so I'm going to skip that. The project name here, I'm going to call it accept a payment webform .NET webform accept a payment. We're going to use get, and it's just going to live there. Okay, so cool. All right, so this gives us just a basic page, and if we click run and fire this up and take a look at what we get, here is the resulting page that just has a button that says click me, and when you click it, it says you clicked me. So coming back over here, the way this is happening is that in the code behind, in the C# code behind, we have this button clicked handler that is running and executing this button text. We don't actually want to use that, but we are going to use this form in this page to handle our clicking. So I just deleted the button click handler on the back end. I'm going to remove the on click here and just rename the text of the button to pay. Okay, so before we go too far, let's install some dependencies. So I'm going to say manage NuGet references. I'm going to add Stripe.net. This is the Stripe client library, the SDK, the whatever you want to call it, that allows us to interact with the Stripe API and make API requests to Stripe with our within any .NET code. The next thing I wanted to do is in previous episodes we kind of just like hard coded the secret API key directly into the code behind. I'm not going to go over using app secrets today, but you'll want to manage your app secrets carefully and not just hard code your API keys in here. I would say go research how to securely manage your API keys. So in global.asax, when the application runs, I'm going to globally set our API key here. So I'm gonna import the Stripe library, and I'm gonna say Stripe configuration.api key is equal to, I'm gonna just dump in my API key. Okay, I'll paste that there. And so this will, when the application starts, it's going to globally set our API key. Then we don't have to do this on every page where we might use Stripe. Next, let's install the next dependency, which is Stripe.js. So this is a client-side library. It's going to live in likely in the head of your HTML page. If you're using one of the layouts, the master pages, you want to put you want to import Stripe.js on the master page. So I'm just going to go to Stripe.js, the Stripe.js documentation here. And this is the script tag that we want to use. It says including Stripe.js here. We'll click copy, and then we'll dump that directly into the head tag. You do not want to use async or defer or anything fancy unless you're super familiar with what you're doing and you're sure that the JavaScript that's running is running in the order that you expect. Okay, so now what I want to do is I'm gonna, let's see. So yeah, there's a couple of different ways that we could do this. The way that I'm gonna do it now is just assuming that you already know the amount that the customer is going to pay when they arrive at your page, okay? So if you don't already know how much they're gonna pay and you need to collect up and build up the context of some cart, you'll have to do this. You'll have to like figure out the logic for building up the cart up to the point where you're going to make the payment. But we're going to just assume that this person is going to pay like, you know, $100 USD. And God, I hate that Visual Studio Code like auto completes the wrong thing there. That is okay. Oh gosh. All right. So we've got our form. We have a button on our form. We need a div with the ID. It doesn't matter what the ID is, but I like to follow the convention and watch. Like if I push the close bracket here, if I type the close bracket, that, okay. This is so annoying. Oh my gosh. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Like none of those hotkeys or the order of the keys that I'm pressing make any sense. I don't usually work inside of Visual Studio, but I'm trying to because I feel like it's probably most familiar for folks that are working with ASP.NET Webforms. So the ID of the div that I'm creating here is going to be card element. Now this div is going to be where the card element is rendered. So card element is rendered here, okay? And all right, so let's refresh our page or fire our page back up and take a look. Okay, so you see the content here, card element is rendered here. And if we inspect that, we see that inside of the contents of this div, we are still seeing card element is rendered here. So the next step is that we want to write a little bit of JavaScript on the client that will replace the contents of this and is going to mount a Stripe.js element here. Okay, now generally it doesn't really matter where you put this as long as, okay, so the code that you're writing in this script tag, in this inline script tag, is going to want to interact with this div element. So this div element must be loaded and it must be rendered into the DOM or into the browser. It has to be loaded into the browser before we can interact with it. And so the way that we do that is we want to listen. We're going to, our JavaScript code that's going to execute immediately is just going to register a listener for an event. And that event is going to say, when the entire document is loaded, execute this function. And that looks like this. So we're going to say document.add event listener DOM content loaded. And when this event happens, the function, like after all of the content is loaded into the DOM, this function will execute. We don't want to execute any of the code that's going to depend on elements that are inside of the page. We don't want to run any of that code until the document is loaded. So we're going to listen for DOM content loaded. Then the first thing we need to do is create a variable to hold an instance of the Stripe object on the client. Now this object can take a number of arguments, but at a minimum, we have to pass the first argument, which is a string, and the value of that string is our publishable key. Okay, I'm gonna drop that there. The next thing we want to do is create an instance of this elements object. So we're gonna say elements is equal to stripe.elements. The next thing we want to do is create a specific element, and that is going to be of type card, and we're going to mount it on this card element spot here. So we're going to say var card element is equal to elements.create card, and then we can say card element.mount and pass in the CSS selector for this div. And so since we're going to use the ID, we're going to start this with a £, and then say card element. Okay. Now, if we refresh our page, you'll see that no longer does it say card element is mounted here, and instead we have these controls where we can type in credit card details. And notice that there's like all this interactive stuff that's happening. You see the card sort of flip around. A common test card number is 42424242. This is going to be the most common Stripe test card. We are in test mode. Okay, so we have our element and it's registered, but when we click pay, nothing happens. We're posting back to default. We're posting back and hitting our ASPX handler, but nothing is happening yet because we haven't created a payment intent and we aren't handling any of the future steps. So let's, this is actually a pretty good start, right? We're registering the element and that's showing on the page. So that is good. So I'm going to save this and then I'm going to go to the code behind. And here I want to add some logic for when the page loads. So I'm going to say like protected void page load. Okay, now within this page load function, we can ask, is this a postback? Meaning, was a post request received at default.aspx? And if a post request was received, we're gonna do something different than if a get request was received. So if it wasn't postback, then here we're gonna create a payment intent, expose its client secret publicly. Okay, and then otherwise, we want to like handle post request from form submission. This is likely where you're gonna like put the payment information in the database, like create an order, et cetera, et cetera. Like you might, there's a number of different things that you might do when the form is submitted there. But here, when we want to create the payment intent, let's do that like so. In this case, we are going to import the Stripe library again using Stripe. Okay, and we're going to say var options is a new payment intent create options. And the payment intent create options is going to accept the amount, which is going to be an integer value in cents, the currency, which is going to be a string value for the currency, and then you might also specify the payment method types. And this is going to be a list of strings, new list of string, and here we can just pass card as the payment method type that we're supporting in this case. And I probably don't have collection generic yet. So using system.collections.generic, okay. And now we have some options. This is going to be the data that's sent to the Stripe API when we're creating a payment intent. And again, we're going to do this on page load. So when someone gets the page, before the HTML is rendered and sent back to the user, we are going to make an API call on the server to Stripe's API and receive back a payment intent object. So next we need to create a service. We're going to say new payment intent service. This is just like the typical structure for making an API call. And then we're going to say var payment intent is equal to service.create, and then we're going to pass in options. Now, the result of this method call here is going to be an API call, and we're going to get the response. And this object is going to be an instance of a Stripe payment intent. Now, the payment intent is going to have a client secret property, and this client secret property is a string value that represents the client secret of this payment intent, and we want that on the front end so that we can confirm the payment intent and pay it. So at this point, we haven't actually passed in any payment method details yet. So we need to pass this client secret back to the client. And the way that I'm going to do that in ASP.NET Web Forms is I'm going to create a public string called client secret, and I'm going to set the value of that client secret equal to the client secret of the payment intent returned from the API call. Now, by making this a public string in the code behind, we can then use it on the client in our JavaScript by using these, the percent bracket equals. Actually, I'm going to put it down here just so we can see what it looks like. So we'll just say span payment intent ID is equal to client secret. So you should do this too, just for testing as you're building. Oh my gosh, that's annoying. Holy smokes. Can I disable that? Oh, Visual Studio. Wow, that is frustrating. Okay, we're going to refresh the page here, remove default.aspx, and the name client secret doesn't exist in the current context because I didn't restart the server. Okay, so now we have the payment intent. Oh, I said ID, but it's the client secret. So it actually starts with the ID of the payment intent, and then it has this client secret. It's totally cool to pass this back to the client. It's fine to share the client secret back with the one customer who is going to pay. This ID is not useful. The client secret is not useful without the API keys that are related to your account. So it is totally cool to have this just embedded in the HTML. And that looks exactly like what we want. The next step is to take this client secret and pass the client secret, and then pass this whole card element, reference to the entire card element, into a method on Stripe.js called confirm card payment. So we're going to do that now. So here we'll say, so we need to add a form submission handler so that this form doesn't automatically post back to the code behind. So I'm going to change the form ID to payment form and save. And then I'm going to say, let's grab reference to the payment form. So var form is equal to document.getElement by ID payment form. So now I'm passing in the ID here. So you get element by ID, this payment form ID matches this ID in here. Now we're going to say form.add event listener submit. The submit event is what I want to listen for, and the second argument to add event listener is a function, this callback function that will take as its first argument reference to the event that happened, and we want to ensure that we're preventing the default. So e.prevent default will make it so that the default for submitting this form back to the server is not done. Like, we don't want it to post back to the server. We do want to add method post here, I believe. Not that it matters a ton, but the reason why we want to prevent the default is that we need to, at this point, take the reference of this card element, which now has the payment details entered, and take the client secret that we were rendering for the payment intent, client secret here. And we need to confirm that card payment with those payment details. So the way this works is we call stripe.confirmCardPayment. And the first argument is the client secret. Client secret. And we have to put quotes around this because otherwise it'll just render the raw value for the client secret into the JavaScript. But this needs to be a string value. So we wrap it with quotes, single or double, doesn't matter. JavaScript doesn't care. And then the second argument is going to be this options block where we can say payment method. And at a minimum, we need to pass the card reference to the card element. Now, by default, you don't have to pass anything else. Like oftentimes our examples will show billing details, and this will include a name, and we'll fill it in with a default string, Jenny Rosen, right? Technically, you could pass more billing details, and indeed, you likely want to collect several billing details. And you can do so in this form by adding inputs. So let's just do that. Input type is text, and we'll say the ID is name, and run at equals server. And I'm going to set the value to Jenny Rosen, so we don't have to always type it, and that should be good. Okay, so this is going to be a text input. Now, in order to pass this name value here and use the name value that was collected in this text input, we need to grab reference to that text input box and then pass its value here. So before the form is submitted, I might say var name input is equal to document.get element by ID name. Okay, that's going to be the name input box. And then here, instead of passing this raw string inline, I can say name.value. All right, great. So this Stripe.confirm card payment is going to return a promise. So we can, if we're comfortable with using async await in modern JavaScript, we can await this. I'm trying to keep this just ES5 and like very traditional so that it should work as expected for most ASP.NET Web Form scenarios where you might be in like some old browsers or something. Okay, so I'm going to pass, instead of using async await, you can also chain on .then, and this will take a callback function, and that callback will be this callback function will be called on once the confirm card payment step is done. Now this call to Stripe.confirm card payment again is taking the card details out of the card element. They're going to be passed to Stripe. Stripe's going to store those securely or work with those securely to tokenize them, and it's going to return back a token. And if that card also required some next actions, then confirm card payment will also present a modal that will collect those details from the user. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. So in the result here, we likely want to do a couple of things. So if result.error, so if the result has an error property, then something failed as part of this confirm card payment step, and we need to show the user some error. I'm just going to alert result.error.message. But in practice, you likely want to like make that pretty. Okay, and then otherwise, if there is no error, then we'll just say console.log like successful payment, and that'll be wiped out because we're going to call form.submit. And this call to form.submit is actually going to submit the form back to the code behind, which can then take any actions based on what other information the form was collecting. So maybe the form was, some sort of order form where you're picking out a bunch of choices about your product that you're purchasing. We know that it's going to be a $100 product, but we don't necessarily know, do they want the blue one or the yellow one? And so you might be passing other data back to your code behind. All right, so at this point, we've got our stuff all set up. So when the page is fully loaded, we're going to initialize an instance of Stripe. We're going to set up some elements. Okay, so this is like set up elements. And this is saying like when the form is submitted, we are going to tokenize payment details and confirm the payment intent. All right, and then so we're just going to log if it was a successful payment or not. Now let's walk through this. So if I refresh the page, well, let's start. I'm gonna refresh the page, and I'm gonna open so I'm working in Chrome here. I'm gonna right click and say inspect. so that I can see what's happening here. So I'll make this a little bigger. So from the Sources tab in your Chrome Developer Tools, you can click on a line in the gutter and see what's happening. I'm just going to click on line 20 so that we can get into the form submission. So you'll notice that we have our name input here. Jenny Rosen is typed in. We've got our card element. I'm going to enter 4242, and we're going to fill out just like the basic details. We'll click Pay. And that breaks into this click handler. It's not submitting it back to the code behind yet. We're going to run some JavaScript first, and we're telling the browser that by calling e.prevent default right here. So we know that our form handler or our form submit handler is actually, stopping execution. In confirm card payment, we want to make sure that the client secret is being rendered here, and it is, and it matches what's up there. So that's good. Our card element still refers to something on the page. That's great. And so when I click play here, this is going to make the request to Stripe from the client directly to Stripe. And then if it worked out, we'll get some response. So we got back the result. Here in the result, we see a payment intent object, and it has all this data, and the status is succeeded. That means we collected a payment. So that is, we are already collecting a payment just with ASP.NET Webforms. So there is no error property. So we're going to go over to console.log the successful payment, and now we're going to click form submit, and that's going to send a post request back to our code behind. Okay, so that's it. That's the whole thing. That's how it works. The only thing that's different here on this page is that now we're looking at default.aspx, and it's hard to tell that it was actually posted back, but it was. And even before the post request was sent back to our server, the charge was already completed and already successful. That happens on the client. And in order to do any sort of fulfillment for this payment, we want to implement a webhook handler. So when someone successfully pays, we just saw that we're going to get back into this callback here. That's great. But there's a risk that someone clicks pay and then they close the browser tab, or their network goes down, or something happens where after we know that there is a successful payment, there is some disconnection between the customer's browser and our server. And so rather than handling any fulfillment directly from the success callback of Stripe.confirm card payment, instead we need to implement a webhook handler. So let's go do that next and talk about webhooks. Okay, so a webhook is a tool for a third party to notify you of something happening, of some event happening. It's a push notification from an API, from some third party. They're telling you, hey, payment intent was successful, or customer was created, or account was updated, or whatever, right? And so when that API call comes from a third party directly to our application, there's no UI. No user ever sees a webhook, okay? They don't see anything about the webhook. They don't see anything about the event. There's no interaction. There's no UI. This is purely something that is going to be sent from server to server. It's an API call from someone else to you. And so in order to receive that API call, we need to set up a webhook handler. So I'm going to create a new file, and this is going to be called a web handler with code behind. I'm going to name it webhooks. Okay, web handler with code behind. Click new. This creates an ASHX file. ASHX. So now we're going to have some route that's called localhost, I think it's 88,000 maybe, / webhooks.ashx. And third parties can send post requests to our endpoint, and we're going to process that request and handle the data that's coming in this case from Stripe. So in order to handle webhooks, there is some documentation over here, webhooks build. So if you go to webhooks control, or the webhooks documentation on Stripe.com. You'll see if you go to .NET, there's a whole bunch of stuff here, but this is again implemented for ASP.NET MVC, but some of these things are going to apply. So the first is that we need to have our endpoint secret. So the endpoint secret is the first piece of data that we want. And so let's go find the bar endpoint secret. It says this is going to be, yeah. It's going to be a string value, and we're going to test our webhook handler today with the Stripe CLI. So we're going to say, if you want to just get the endpoint secret, you can say stripe listen -- print secret, and this will give you a webhook endpoint secret for working with the Stripe CLI. In practice, you can also just say stripe listen -- forward to localhost, and I can never remember the port that this is being. Okay, so 8080 / webhooks.ashx. Okay, so now stripe listen is a command that comes from the Stripe CLI, the Stripe command line tool. And by running this command, you will set up a direct connection between Stripe and your local machine. And when events happen on your Stripe account, they'll be forwarded to this URL. So a post request will be sent to this URL when an event happens on your account. So this is another way to get the endpoint secret, is that when you start the listener, it will print it out. Now the listener is just going to hang. That's fine. It's listening for and waiting for requests. You want to just leave the tab there and leave that running. But we do want to put in our webhook endpoint secret here. The endpoint secret allows us to verify the authenticity of the request and ensure that it did indeed come from Stripe. So, all right, so we've got our endpoint secret. We also need the raw JSON payload. And so we can say var JSON is equal to a new stream reader. And we want to pass in like the raw request body, which is available on context. So this HTTP context that was passed in, .request.input stream. And then here we can call read .read to end, I believe. Okay. Now this stream reader is coming from something.io. How do we fix this? Using system.io. And then finally, we want the signature, and that's going to come from context.request.headers Stripe signature. Okay. So now we're going to try to verify the authenticity of this, and we need a try catch block. Okay, console.writeLine E. If it fails, throw E. All right, so while we're trying to, okay, so the function that we want to call is on event utility. So this comes with, again, with Stripe.net library. We're going to say var Stripe event is equal to event utility. Okay, so now we definitely need to import Stripe using Stripe. And then we can kill this reference and say event utility.construct event. And this is going to take those three arguments. So the JSON, the header, and then the secret. So we're going to pass in JSON, the signature, and the secret, endpoint secret. All right, so that is going to, this construct event method on the event utility is taking in the raw JSON payload. It's taking in the signature from the request headers, and then it's taking in the endpoint secret that we got for our webhook endpoint. Now, every single webhook endpoint is going to have a unique endpoint secret. So if you create multiple from your dashboard, they will all have different webhook secrets. So you want to make sure that, like, if you're in dev or if you're in test or CI or whatever, you're using the right secret string value. This is, again, something that you likely want to manage. You definitely want to manage it as you would any API keys or secret keys. But I would say it all depends on your application and how you're handling other secrets. So now that we have this Stripe event, We can switch on its type, Stripe event.type, and depending on the type, case events dot, and then there's a whole bunch of Stripe events or like webhook event types here, tons and tons and tons. The one we care about when we're collecting, when we're just accepting a payment, is payment intent succeeded. And I think can't remember if it just works like, do I have to put a $sign in front? Okay. And then here we can just say like Stripe event.type. So that'll show us the other event types that we're receiving. And then here for payment intent succeeded, I just want to show how to like deserialize this. So we can say var payment intent. We can get the payment intent, the actual payment intent object, out of the Stripe event object that we just like constructed this event from or deserialized it into. So Stripe event.data.object is the data for a payment intent. And now we want to cast that to a payment intent. And this should allow us to say like payment succeeded. And then we can just put like the ID of the payment intent maybe. Payment intent.id, and let's also do for, and then the amount. So payment intent.amount. Okay. And why is this red? Can fall through. Oh, right. And then we have to break, right? Okay. It's been a long time since I've used ASP.NET Webforms. Okay, cool. So we're constructing the event, and we're going to switch on its event type. There's a whole bunch of different event types. The one we care about in this case is payment intent succeeded. We're going to print this out. And again, in practice, this is where you might look up the payment in the database and update its state. You might also like fulfill the order, send a customer email, tons of different things that you might do at this point based on this request that you're receiving from Stripe. Okay. So let's test it out. Let's stop this, start it again. So this Webhooks ASHX again is not a customer facing thing. So customers don't see this page. So from the command line, from Stripe CLI, you can do Stripe trigger and then the name of the event. So in this case, payment intent.succeeded. And this will take all of the actions through the API to result in a payment intent succeeded event. And I see here we're getting 500. So something is failing in our handler. Let's see if we can figure it out based on the console here. Let's see if I can make this, I can't make that bigger. All right, so what have we got going on? Let's clear it out. Let's make one more request. And, all right, the signature for the webhook is not present in the signature header. So did this not work? Something's wrong. Signature. Let's say console.writeLine signature and console.writeLine signature. And then let's restart it, and just to see where this is coming from or if this is coming through. Also, I forgot one thing, and that is that when you start a listener, the API version that Stripe is using to generate the event JSON payload is by default the same API version as your account. unless you explicitly set the API version on the webhook endpoint when you're configuring it in the dashboard. In the case of Stripe CLI, you can say -L, and this will use the this will use the latest API version for events. We want to use -L because, and we want to make sure that we're using the right API version for our version of Stripe.net, because Stripe.net is pinned to a specific API version, and we want to make sure that we're deserializing that JSON into the correct object types and that we'll be able to. So I'm going to restart this with -L so that it's using the latest API version. Then I'm going to re-trigger this payment intent succeeded event. I'll come back over here and see if there's anything different. So it looks like the signature is definitely in there. The signature for the webhook is not present in the signature header. Why are we getting that? The signature for the webhook is not present. Okay, Stripe signature header. Huh. Stripe signature. I'm going to try to just put it directly in line here. I know that shouldn't have any bearing on it. Double check this is spelled right. Okay. I mean, we see the signature is there. That is the signature that we want to pull out. So I don't know what's going on. Okay, I'm just going to delete that. Stop. Start. And the signature for the webhook is not present in the signature. Line 23. What? Is this the right endpoint secret? No, I don't know how that changed. All right, let's try this again. Is that different? No. Huh, I must not have copied the whole thing. Okay, so I think my, the endpoint secret that I had was wrong. It was like only part of it. It was missing the last like 5 characters for some reason. Let's see if that worked. Okay, so here we go. Got payment intent created, and we get, okay, so in the log for Stripe listen, now we see the 200 is coming back. So if we trigger the payment intent succeeded event, in the Stripe listen log, we see that payment intent succeeded is firing. And in the console in Visual Studio, we can see at the bottom here, payment intent succeeded for $20. That's because the test, when we say Stripe trigger payment intent succeeded, it's creating a test payment intent, and that was for $20, but that's not necessarily what ours will be. So let's go check out ours. We're going to refresh the page here, and let's also use an SCA test card. So I'm going to say SCA test is the name of the customer, and then I'm going to use the card that ends in 3155. This is another Stripe test card, but this one, when you try to pay in test mode, it will present you with this modal, and this modal will in production, the content of this modal will be presented by the bank, by the issuing bank of the customer. But in test, we're presenting just like a test payment confirmation page from Stripe. So when we click on complete authentication, now our payment is successful, and we're redirected back over here. Now, if we go back to our terminal, we see that we did receive payment for this, or I guess this one was like, yeah, $20, and this one's $100. So, okay, I think that's all that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, hopefully this is useful. If you have questions, comments, concerns, if you have answers to some of the questions that I had while going through this about, maybe where you put secrets or generally how you might store things in the database, would love to see those in the comments. And hey, if you're liking the content that's on this channel, you're finding it useful, I would really appreciate a subscribe. So yeah, that's it. Until next time. Cheers.